Hi, Shawn. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce you. Shawn's a retired U.S. Army
Sure.
Master Sergeant with over 25 years of information systems engineering and cybersecurity operations experience. He currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer for the Cyber6 Group, a cybersecurity consulting firm that's purpose is identifying risk within the small to medium-sized businesses who don't have existing frameworks, expertise, or budget. The company uses a unique hands-on approach to cybersecurity by creating a roadmap that's directly aligned with their clients' business objectives. He also runs a nonprofit that supports local school sports programs by developing athletes who have aspirations of playing at the next level. Welcome to the interview, Shawn.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, first of all, thank you for your service. Your country thanks you, definitely.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for that.
According to your LinkedIn, you started your Army career as a wide area network engineer towards the latter half of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in the Army and how it helped get you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So thank you again for having me on this interview. It's been a blessing and an honor to speak with you today. So as I worked up through my career as an information systems analyst, I had a kind of a natural migration to wide area networking, enterprise networks, building them, architecture, the infrastructure behind them. And so that's kind of how it all started for me. As an information operator, if you will, the Army has a tendency to grow yourself, as you grow along through your career. So I started diving into the networks pretty early. As it relates to my time over in Iraq, I led a team of about 10 security and information systems, what we call communicators in the Army. And we ran all of things, ones and zeros, passing the network, if you will, all things radio, wide area networks, battle communication systems. We ran that for our entire transportation brigade. So having that tactical experience, if you will, and being able to bring that back to what we call the commercial world or the civilian world, it's been an honor to be able to inject a lot of what I learned in kind of in both worlds, if you will.
Right. I mean, obviously, cybersecurity is very important on an organizational level, but to our national security as well. I mean, it's a huge thing. It sounds like it was a great experience and then you quickly became an expert within your field very fast. After your service, you relatively stayed within the cybersecurity path as a manager of security operations, director of sales and business development at an information security company, and then eventually you got to where you are today as the CEO of the Cyber6 Group. Throughout the time you spent within cybersecurity, how has the industry changed, and has there been a major shift in focus that you're aware of?
Well, I will tell you, that transition from each of those roles, there's been a vast change as we call the digital information age, or the digital transformation, if you will. And literally in a matter of 2 decades, I've seen from a dial-up network and building wide area networks on dial-up. I mean, that's where I started. Building these networks that were dialing into DSL lines, and it's just unbelievable how much we've transformed over the last 2 decades. Specifically speaking on my time as I left the military and went into the private sector, there's an evident vast change in the technologies and the equipment as it relates to the 2 areas. I will tell you that we spoke about security in the military, but one of the things I noticed when I come out into the commercial and the private sector is nobody talked about it. It was always pushback for whatever reason, and primarily because they couldn't do their job. And so if you're talking about an HR department or a finance department or what have you, anytime you would put a security control in place, it was immediate pushback. So to round the answer to your question up, it's been a vast change in the different technologies and approaches as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And of course, I mean, if we're going to talk about the past, we need to talk a little bit about the future as well. So to kind of piggyback off that, where do you see cybersecurity heading towards? And then in the next 5 years, where do you see the biggest change happening?
Yeah, so for me, I struggled a little bit as I transitioned from, I worked for one of the largest nonprofit science and technology companies in the world, Battelle Memorial Institute, when I left the military. And so it was still a little like, being in that environment, right? And so I still struggled with, how can I apply what I've learned and the passion that I have for security to the small business owner of America?
Right.
Frankly, they're the foundation of our country. They're the foundation of our economic development in our country. Certainly not the big box stores or what have you. They provide value to our economy, of course. But when you have a small business owner, that they are affected by things like ransomware and just their manufacturing lines are shut down for 2 minutes. They lose potential thousands of dollars, versus, a manufacturing line on, Honda or a big name auto manufacturer. Yeah, they're going to lose some money too, but it's not going to hurt their pockets or potentially close their doors like it would a small business, if you will. So how I see it changing the most is kind of what we were preaching in the military and some of the identifiable security weaknesses and different things that we were finding in wide area networks and software and so on. They would just, in the commercial sector, software would just sit on the shelf and it wasn't configured correctly or what have you. So what I see changing the most is now we're at this spectrum. We're at this pinnacle point where we now have to kind of flip everything on its head and look at it from a controls perspective, a framework perspective. What policies do you have in place? What actions are you taking to improve the business processes as it relates to cybersecurity? And when the day begins and the day ends, it's where is your data? That's what our threat actors want is data. They don't care about a social security number. Ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, if they've got PII or whatever they're after, that's helpful, but they want the data. The company's data is so critical. And so if you can lock that down and prevent them from having it, hence ransomware, then they're going to be in trouble, in a heap of trouble. So, what I see changing the most is our approach to cybersecurity.
Right. And I mean, in that answer, you mentioned ransomware, and I talked to your counterpart, Paul Hugenberg, about it in the healthcare in the healthcare side, but on the commercial side and also in the city side, it's pretty scary stuff. I mean, these hackers come in and they just take your system and you have to pay the money or you don't get it back.
Yeah. I mean, there are things that there are safeguards you can put in place, and even post an event like ransomware, there are things that decryption keys and tools that you can use. But if they've taken a variant of a ransomware and changed it into something their own, made it their own, then you're going to end up calling you're going to emailing an extortionist to get that key. We're going through it with a few clients present day right now, where these clients are literally at the beck and call. They're in trouble if they don't get those encryption keys. So.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, in your past experience, it might not have been as talked about previously, but I mean, IT security is a pretty hot topic, regardless of whatever industry you're serving. And it can be overwhelming for those companies who are just now starting to look into its intricacies. But in your mind, where should they start?
Yeah, so a lot of, to be honest, a lot of small to medium-sized businesses even, and I'll refer to that marketplace or that area for us, our target area, because we're so passionate about it. You know, when the discussions start, it's how much is it going to cost me, right? It's never until something happens. It's never, oh, well, let me listen to what you have to say. It's what's it going to cost, right? Yeah. So we created a program that we believe is budget friendly. More importantly, it's hands-on. It's taking the hands-on approach, taking a relational, making it a relationship versus a transaction. So where should companies start? So I think the biggest mistake a small, medium-sized business can make is not doing their homework. Meaning having somebody just come in and, you know, saying that they're going to protect them, whether it be an MSP or whether it be a security organization that sells them, you know, these bright, shiny stars, right? I think it's absolutely imperative that the owners of these companies, presidents, if they're large enough to have an executive team, sit down with, you know, with a company like ours and or a professional cybersecurity expert that has a full gamut experience, starting with framework, starting with GRC, starting with understanding what is a framework. You know, these small companies, they I'll give you an example. My good friend runs their family-owned recycling company. And up until the last few years, they haven't had to worry about any of this. And recently, answering a third-party vendor questionnaire, they were asked, what cybersecurity do you have in place? And it was left blank because they didn't know how to answer it. They don't have something in place as it relates to what controls, what safeguards do you have, what software you're protecting your systems, what hardware do you have. They sometimes don't go down to that granular level. However, those questionnaires are important. And so again, to circle back, where should companies start? I believe they sit down with a cybersecurity framework expert, somebody that has an audit background, somebody that has controls background, and have a discussion centered around what's a cybersecurity program look like, and identify what inside their company is the most critical to them. If it's something as simple as just the operations floor, well, how do we protect that? We don't need to sell you a big, huge, you know, cybersecurity program if you don't need it, you know. And so again, we want to have a relationship conversation and build trust within the company, and less about selling products.
Right. And I mean, at some point, right, you kind of mentioned there in your answer that it does kind of happen. People always worry about budgeting, but I mean, it's got to start somewhere with the review process. Without that budget, it's hard for companies to kind of stay protected from hackers and malicious attackers, right? Because I mean, at some point, you do have to pay for those services that you want. I recently read in an article that security budgeting is particularly hard with companies within healthcare, and the majority of them haven't updated their IT security budgets in 3 years, which is a couple cycles that they're recommending to update those systems. What are your recommendations for cybersecurity budgets, and where should companies begin on allocating those funds? Like, how should they allocate them?
You know, so this is a science within itself. You know, no expert. You know, there's experts out there that have far greater experience than I do in this area. I will share with you my opinion based upon my experience and my interactions within the SMB space, and previous organizations I've worked for. You know, it starts with understanding what your threat landscape is. It's understanding what you have to protect, right? You may, I'll go back to my previous, touch on a little bit of the previous question that I injected an answer to, and that is, you know, if you don't need, if the door, it's almost like the old analogy, there's a door inside a door, okay? And if the outside door is locked, and there's no need for the inside door to put a lock on it because there's security at the outer perimeter, because it's simply, there's nothing beyond that second door, meaning there's not this expansive, exposure to, some sort of operations floor or what have you. Mm-hmm. So circling that back to technology, if there is a, if there's a security control or a piece of software or an edge firewall or what have you that you can put in place that does the job, more importantly, it protects the organization, and without having to go, a step further.
Right.
And it's all based on their, it fits inside their budget within the cybersecurity plan. Then that's the approach they should take. Now, how you allocate those funds, typically in the enterprise space, it's anywhere between 1.5 and 3x someone's like total revenue.
Right.
We're talking about, some of these larger companies, that's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, right? Well, the mom and pops of the world, they don't have that luxury. So, but the security program still applies. You still need it. So how do you get creative, right? How do you be creative in a way that you don't necessarily need all of the bells and whistles, but you can still protect that company's intellectual property or their brand.
Right. Now, I mean, after those companies review those controls and then decide on their budget, they need to fill it by looking at vendors and purchasing solutions, right? That's kind of the next step. So who should be involved in that vendor evaluation process? And do you think that it should be exclusive to the C-suite executives?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Matt. I think during your evaluation process of what cybersecurity program or controls you put in place, that role should be someone within the organization set aside for somebody that has the experience, that can talk about the technologies. And we're not just talking about our technologies as security providers or security practitioners. We're also talking about, what about the manufacturing technologies that are on the floor within this particular company? We don't know everything about every bell and whistle that's on their floor, right? So we need to understand what that technology capabilities are. Is there a software that has been tested on that little trinket that they're creating, or that creates their little trinkets or whatever it is, the plastics, whatever. So I think it's to answer your question bluntly, it absolutely has to be a cybersecurity professional, or what we would call an information security officer that has years of experience, where he or she has been in a C-level role, an executive level role, that can help the company make those decisions to choose the right vendors, so that this hardware and the software and these protection mechanisms that we put in place don't become what we refer to in the industry as shelfware, where they just sit off, in the corner, and they're wasted dollars, right? They're wasted dollars. So hopefully that sends a clear message. It's important to us that and we do information security reviews all the time for small businesses. They're budget friendly. We're able to lead their ownership in the right direction versus just trying to be transactional and sell them products. So.
Yeah, right. And then like another aspect to keep in mind after establishing who's going to review these solutions, or a team maybe, is to actually look at the vendors themselves, right? You got to dig in and actually begin that process.
Right.
There could be a lot of risk involved with selecting the right cybersecurity solutions for your company. The last thing a company wants to do is face a breach because their vendor mishandled their data, right? So what do you think companies should look for when deciding whether or not they should work with a certain vendor?
I think one of the biggest shortfalls that we're seeing is that, with applications being designed by the hundreds, literally the hundreds, if not thousands daily, right? A lot of times what happens is, these applications, we'll just start there. We'll start there, and we'll probably end there because we could talk about it forever. These applications will get created, and there will be no testing. There'll be development testing, but they'll never consider, they don't consider the security ramifications that apply to if you take that application and you inject it inside a business, right? What we see oftentimes when we do a web application pen test or application security testing, we find little loopholes, and so we'll just use that as a perfect example that those are things that you need to look for. And the average owners of I keep on talking about manufacturing. Let's just talk about your company, for instance. The different billing solutions that you guys have, and have those software packages been tested? Your organization goes through an immense amount of testing. I know this firsthand because we work with you guys. But it's so critical to understanding what those companies should be looking for, and you got to have an expert, somebody that can speak to that, somebody that can say, yeah, that's been tested. It's well known in the industry. It's respectable. It's got it's in the Gartner quadrant. If that's the case, a lot of times small business don't care about the Gartner quadrant. No offense there to Gartner, right? But being able to have that articulated conversation with the owners of companies to say, yeah, this is the right software for you, or this is the right hardware, this is the right solution, right? I like to speak on providing solutions, right? We don't necessarily we feel that at the Cyber6 Group we're selling a solution and creating a relationship versus just selling a product.
Right. I mean, in a sense, you're kind of a cybersecurity vendor, so that's kind of how you tell your clients that you're in good hands? Is more the solution side than just a product?
Yeah, so we have flipped our approach, gets flipped on its head. So for years and years and years, what's happened is folks in the industry, companies in the industry would identify a problem by saying, solving a problem by saying, you need that software, okay, or you need that hardware at your edge, or whatever the case may be, without doing a review of what the program even looks like. Maybe how do you know as a software provider? I mean, it's like, you go to buy a car. How are you going to know it's going to do what you asked of it to do in the snow up here in Ohio if you've never driven it in the snow, right? You trust that. You trust that individual that's selling it to you is going to be honest and forthright with you. That says, hey, that real-wheel drive vehicle, oh, sure, it's going to do just fine in the snow. No, it's not. It's not going to do well at all. You get my point. So it's important to that we take that approach. We go and identify the problem by looking at the entire spectrum of the company's background and what frameworks they have in place. If they don't have one, let's build it first. Then let's talk about what you need. And in only rare cases, in most cases, should you go the other way around.
Right. So after going through that process, finding their vendors, filling up their budget, the company needs to move into that implementation phase, right? And this includes the installation, maybe any training, execution portion, right? So in some cases that could get complicated, and then a lot of business owners might fear that it disrupts their operations entirely. Is it possible to implement a cybersecurity infrastructure into a business without disrupting those business operations?
Could you say that one more time? You cut out. I'm sorry. You can cut that out if you want.
Sure. After filling up their budget, that company will move into that implementation phase, where it includes the installation, training, and execution. In some cases, it could get complicated, which many fear will disrupt their business operations. Is it possible to implement a cybersecurity infrastructure without disrupting those objectives?
Absolutely. And so I think that is the biggest, that's probably one of the biggest fears that companies have, right? Because that's their their special sauce, right? That's their that's their livelihood. Okay. And so what we believe at Cyber6 is that hands-on approach, having that conversation and allowing us the opportunity to earn their trust through building that relationship and delivering the message of how we're going to take that approach, right? And outline every single step. I was with a financial institution this morning, and that was the final question he had. And I've met with him 3 times, and that final question is so what's day 0 to 30 look like? And I was able to tell him, I said, the whole goal in the first 30 days is we've got to build a relationship within the business.
Yeah.
You have to earn trust within each and every business unit, so they understand that we're not going to affect their operations. That's not our goal here.
Right.
Our goal is not to put a security control in place. Our goal is not to put a security control in place so that you can't do your job. Okay. We don't want that. I think the biggest approach is more of a relational approach first. Relational approach first, instead of transactional, meaning going in and saying, well, we're just going to put these controls in place, and not giving an understanding of why, right?
Right.
So that to me is takes that fear level and brings it down completely.
Right, and I mean, I think that's a great way to approach it. Cybersecurity is really all about trust. I mean, whether or not it's from the training the employees about how to do something, they need to know how to do it, and then obviously the manager needs to be able to trust them that they're doing it the correct way, right? So that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect point, Matt. And I'll tell you to expound further. Ironically, at the end of our conversation today, once we get through onboarding them and 18, 24 months down the road where we've established a good solid framework for them, they're $1 billion financial institution, right? They've never had to broach some of these things that we're talking about before. So once we get down that road of 18 to 24 months of maturity, this question back to me is how can I bring my people up to code, if you will, or get them educated? And the approach we take is it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street. So we're not coming in to bang our fists on the table and say, you must, you will, right?
Yeah.
It's taking that approach of we're educating as well, because we want you to get mature enough so you can run your own program, and then we can worry on the back end quarterly about quarterly audits, doing pen testing, coming in and doing reviews, phishing education, coming in and maintaining that relationship. But at the same time, internally, they feel like they own something, right? Now they've accomplished something. Now we've got this framework in place. We've got this cybersecurity program in place, and they're no longer, it's strictly about us, right? It's always, he said this perfectly this morning. He's like, our executives have to understand that this is not, Cyber6 coming in or anybody for that matter, whether it's us or someone else, right? Coming in and just running the show. It's a two-way street. We want them to feel confident that we're guiding them in the right direction. I use this analogy. Anybody that sees this that is not an Ohioan, there is a great place up in Port Clinton called it's an amusement park. You know where I'm talking about, Cedar Point. There is a kids, I would say it's for adults too, a ride where you have the bumper cars kind of guide you in the right direction. Well, we're that guide in the middle, right? We're going to take that company down that path to success, right? And we're just going to guide you. That's all we're going to do. We're going to stay and keep you in line. And as we build out those tracks, as we build out that road, you take it upon yourself beyond that.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. It's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So Once everything's implemented, the job really still isn't complete. I mean, in order to thrive, you need to
No,
treat
it's not.
cybersecurity as a living environment. This means
Right.
that you got to check up every so often and ensure everything's running as it should. What are the best ways to ensure the success of an already implemented infrastructure, and how should companies follow up on their services?
That's a great question, Matt. So I've talked a little bit about it today. One of the things that's important is the information security program never ends.
Yeah,
It's a continuing improvement process. We should say in the military that you never, the foxhole is never perfect until you make it your own. And then even
right.
beyond that, when you move into a different direction, right? You go to
Hmm.
a different, battlefield or whatever the case may be, right? A different location. You still got to build it out.
Yeah.
You still have to maintain it, right? It's got to be maintained. And so what can you do to maintain that? Things like audits, continuing risk assessments. There is nothing wrong with having a quarterly or a semi-annually or an annual risk assessment.
Right.
Now there are regulatory bodies. There are regulatory bodies that require that in some
Hmm.
cases, healthcare, financial institutions, credit unions, and so on. But even for small business, there's nothing wrong with having a cybersecurity professional, an information security officer come in on a quarterly basis and actually just do some standard
Right.
testing, a review of the policies. How are they being applied within the business? And oh, by the way, are the employees following them? Right.
Yeah. Right.
So those are some things that you should follow up with. And we find that once we build that relationship, they'll continue to come back to us and we'll come in on a quarterly basis and maintain that relationship for them.
Right. Right. Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. That's all I got for you, Shawn. Thanks for taking the time for the interview. I
Well,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. I appreciate it.
Um,
It's
Before
been
we leave, is
awesome.
there anything
Thank you
else you
so
want to
much.
mention about cybersecurity, nonprofit, Cyber6 Group?
Yeah. So Cyber6 Group, we're very, very grateful. We have grown quickly, but managed that growth in a manageable form. We're grateful for our
Yeah.
partnership with Etactics and Open Practice Solutions, and our partner relationship there. We've got some great things on the horizon for our company, and so we're hoping to share that with the world here in the months to come. But for now, we're just grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. My last thought would be, if you get an opportunity, you see a veteran, thank a veteran, and also pour into your communities. Our communities need leaders and need people that invest in their young people. That's a passion of ours. My partner and I are very heavily involved in youth sports, both male and female. I run
Yeah.
a female softball youth sports organization, and I love every last one of them. It's so important to the development of your community. So give back. That'd be my last thought there.
Great sound off, Shawn. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks again, Matt.